Fragments of Silicon, as seen in no major motion pictures.
Welcome to another installment of the Fragments of Silicon Daylight interviews. Up this week is Mikeal Forslind of Elden Pixels.
Hello.
Hello. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's 5 p.m. here in Sweden, and we're just finishing the normal day job with the making of the video games, and now we're here talking in this podcast. So it feels great to be here.
Indeed. And it's been a while since we've had you on the program last.
Yeah.
And when we did have you back then, it was in a capacity of a different publisher, developer entity, if you will. So why don't you catch our listeners up to what you've been doing in the past 5 or so years?
Yeah, so I was on the show many years ago, but back then I worked as a PR and marketing manager for a game studio called Zoink Games. And I think I was probably promoting a game called Zombie Vikings, which was this like co-op 4-player game, kind of cool game. Had a quite unsuccessful launch, unfortunately, due to some multiplayer issues. But the game was great, and we had a really fun time releasing it. But that was many years ago, and during that time, at the the last 2 years or so, at my time at Zoink Games, I felt that since I worked with PR and marketing, I wanted to learn more about game development. I've always been a fan of playing video games ever since I was a child back in the 80s, but never have I really made them myself. So outside of working hours from Zoink Games, I decided to make a game called Alva's Awakening together with 3 friends. And we did that for about 2 years, like weekends, nights, and it was released back in 2017. And the plan was kind of to just release the game and, don't really do much more about it, just release it on Steam and then move on to something else. But a year after it came out, this was around when the Switch was as most popular as it ever was. Like everyone was begging us to make a Switch version. I was like, no, we have our own, I'm a marketing manager. I don't really have time to spend on a Switch port. But 2018 was a great time because we just finished a game called Fea, which we released at Zoink Games. And when you work in the video game industry, it's kind of like once you release a game, it's if you want to stay for the next game, you probably want to commit to a year or 2 or 3, depending how long the game's going to be developed. But since we just released that game in 2018, Fea, it felt like a great chance to actually start Elden Pixels full time. So me and a coworker who also worked at Zoink Games called Kevin, we decided to try full time with Elden Pixels. And we did that for 2 years about. And then during those 2 years, we developed Elden's Legacy. And the first 2 years was quite, I wouldn't say rough, that's not the right word, challenging financially for me and my coworker because, we only had Elden's Awakening that didn't bring enough money to actually sustain ourselves. So that was quite challenging. But after 2 years, we released Elden's Legacy, and that was in 2020. And since then, we've been able to continue making games and continue to be more financially stable. And now I run my own company together with like 3 or 4 other people. So that's pretty much what I've been doing the last years.
So you went down the route of many people who appear on this program, and that is indie development. And
yeah, exactly. Like we self-published everything. That's what we did when I worked at Zoink Games as well. So I already knew a lot about marketing, publishing, taking care of the video games as a product. The only thing, which is a huge thing, of course, it was the actually making of the games. But we made Aldous Awakening, and that turned out successful. And then we made Aldous Legacy, and that turned out even more successful. So we went indie, and we also published 2 games. One is called Cathedral, also made here in Sweden, and another game we just released earlier this year called Coin Origins, which was made by a US developer. And now we are currently trying to finish and release, hopefully sometime next year, our game, which is called Avoid Hope, which is the current game we're working on.
Indeed. And before we get to Avoid Hope, I suppose some other questions about LD are in order. I suppose my first question is, has the marketing angle changed any from, your time at Zoink to working at Elden?
Yeah, I'd say it's a big topic, but it's always been challenging being an indie developer, but when I did the games like 10 years ago, because this is almost my 10th year in the game industry, we had a lot of press. Every time we released something or announced something, there were like, so many reviewers, so many articles, so many YouTube videos and stuff like that. And we did podcasts all the time. For each game and for each year we're doing, the press has been almost changed with influence and stuff like that. So there's a lot less press now. There's hardly any blogs and stuff like that. And it's harder than ever, I'd say, to actually reach anyone. And now with this year, with Twitter almost, I wouldn't say disappearing, but merging into something else, it's very hard for us to actually be visible out there. But fortunately for us, we've managed to been doing this for 5 years now. So hopefully we have a lot of people that already bought our previous games that hopefully will end up buying our new games, hopefully. But it's very challenging to reach out with marketing. And to be honest, I don't really know the right answer because it's really hard.
Fair enough, I suppose. I suspect that the one thing it never gets is easier.
No. No, it's certain aspects of video game development is much easier now than it was back in the day. But getting reach on your video game, I'd say, it's more challenging now than ever before. I'd say.
Indeed. We do hear the stories. Because there's a lot of there's a lot of people developing games these days.
Hasn't it been something like almost
it's always a fight, for time and attention.
Hasn't it been like almost every year the number of games on Steam is almost doubled?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know where that number lies now, but I don't think I've heard that the number has been decreasing.
Mm-hmm.
And the consoles are not much better, or mobile. There's nary a platform out there that isn't oversaturated in some capacity.
Yeah. I think the App Store is set to hit almost 1 billion apps by the end of the year, if it hasn't hit that already.
Wouldn't surprise me. Which is why we got things like Apple Arcade these days.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so with that in mind, we should get into the featured game here today, and that is Avoid Hope. So for the uninitiated, what is Avoid Hope?
That's a good question. And I think we're still trying to figure out that ourselves. We've been working on the game for around 2 years. And when we did the Alva games, both Aldous Awakening and Aldous Legacy, I would say the production and the development of those games were quite I wouldn't use the word easy, but it was a lot of blueprints out there because you could look at other video games, other platform games, your Zelda 2 games and whatnot, and there was so many games to take inspirations from. Now that we're working with Avoid Hope, we're kind of trying to create something that's not really. It's not a platforming game. It's not an adventure game. It's not an action game. It's everything in between, and it's kind of hard to both actually articulate the marketing, positioning of the game, and also what kind of game it is. I would say it's mostly a platforming game, but it also has a lot of adventure aspects to it and story aspects to it. But it's very unusual because you can't really kill anyone in the game. You can't destroy anything. You can't collect artifacts, gold, weapons. You don't really have much weapon to defend yourself with. Our main inspiration, I would say, is Another World. Although Another World on the ancient retro game that came out like late 80s, early 90s, can't remember. Although you can kill enemies in that game, that's kind of the game we're being inspired by. Something that plays like a platformer, but it's set in a weird dystopian sort of world and with many mysteries to unfold. So it's an unusual game. Hopefully people will get it, but we're still trying to figuring out exactly how to finish everything in the game because we're still in production and we're still adding stuff and changing stuff. But it feels great and it feels like an interesting game, and I'm really hopeful that people is going to like it.
What would you say is the challenge here in terms of defining the game? Given from your description, you seem to have a fairly good hold of what this is supposed to be.
Yeah, I'd say the most challenging part has been how do you create a fun and exciting platforming game, but you can't kill anyone and you can't collect gold or coins, because that's normally what you do in those platforms games. You kill stuff, you shoot stuff, and you collect stuff. So how do you take that sort of gameplay with the platforming aspect, but you remove all those, but you still create something that's interesting and motivates the player to keep on exploring and keep on playing and keep on trying to find stuff. That's definitely been most of the challenge. Also, the story is quite obtuse. It's very much up for interpretation, and that's also been challenging. How much do we how much do we actually explain to the player that what's going on, what's happening, what you're supposed to do, and how much are we just going to leave the people to explore and find out themselves? So those two parts has been the most challenging parts of the game development so far.
That is an interesting response to the question, because first part, usually the answer to how do you make a platforming game fun without, say, combat or collection is platforming, if you will. It's like, you engage in the jumping itself. And this game seems to have arrived at like the opposite answer, if you will. Like, would you call it a platformer? Or is it just a game where you happen to have jumping in it?
I think it's a good question. I don't know. I did refer to it as a platformer, but when you put it like that, no, it's not focused around the actual movement of platforming. So, maybe an adventure game, but once you call it an adventure game, people are thinking like Uncharted or those kind of 3D games, or like
even
super
Sierra, depending on how old they are.
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, Another World, I would say I would call that a platformer game, and I would also call like Limbo and Inside. And those are also something we've looked at. Although those are amazing games made by big teams, I would still kind of call those platformer adventure games. But hopefully we can still leave it kind of undefined, and hopefully people will find the game. Anyways, I'm not sure. It's going to be interesting to release this game. I have no idea what people will think about it.
No doubt. Well, You have released a demo for this game here. In fact, it's being displayed on screen right now. So, presumably people have played the demo and have left feedback. And what's been, the commentary there?
Extremely positive. But I also think that it's kind of hard. I think most of the people that have reached out are people that have played our previous games, and they're kind of more positive because they play the other games and they like those games, and now they see something else and it's the same type of art style, and so they've been positive, but surprisingly positive. I haven't really heard anything negative. The only thing we've heard is that people want more to do in the game, like once again shoot or kill or stuff like that. But that's kind of hard for us. But that's basically what we're doing. The demo is 2 levels, but we have all the levels done. We have all the music done, all the main world is done, all the story is done. So basically, what we're doing now is just like injecting stuff inside of levels. Small mini stuff, more enemies, more stuff to do, more lore, and hopefully people is going to respond well to that. But everyone has been really positive, more positive than I ever thought it could be. So I'm very excited. We actually postponed the game once we released the demo because we originally were planning to release it this fall around October, since it has this sort of spooky feel to it. But since everyone was so positive, we felt like, okay, well, if we can only add more stuff, we could postpone it a few months and add more stuff, and maybe it could go from a game that's really positive to something that's overwhelmingly passing or very much more well received. Hopefully, but we'll see when time comes.
Indeed. That's good that the response has been positive, because honestly the responses could go either way here. If we're talking about legacy, because Avoid Hope here, I'm presuming doesn't play a lot like the Owl games.
No, it's definitely familiar, because we're using the same artist, the same programmer, the same engine, the same tools, same resolution, the same art style. A lot of stuff is familiar. But and we have some Metroidvania elements to the game, but I wouldn't call it a Metroidvania. But there's definitely some, a lot of the Alva soul in the game, I'd say. And so I'm pretty confident that people that like the Alva games will, enjoy this game as well, even though it's more linear than our previous games.
Indeed. And that kind of differential can cause friction. Seen it happen.
Yeah, maybe but I think this is going to be interesting to go back to listen to once the game has been released. But we were just 3 or 4 or 5 people, small indie studio, no investors, no publisher. We're just doing this on our own. So I think for a lot of people that shines through, and we've been kind of open about this. So hopefully we won't be judged as critically, if we were to sign with EA or something ludicrous like that. So hopefully people will take it for this, a small indie game made by a small team, and hopefully we'll be able to have people really enjoy the game and not have too high standards to hold up against. Hopefully.
I couldn't speak to that, but hopefully that is the case.
Yeah.
Anyway, so have you considered adding stealth elements to the product here?
We have, because it's an interesting story in that sense. It's too long to actually delve into here, but the game started as something completely different. And we were actually awarded funding for this from something called Creative Europe, which is this grant that awards video game funding for cool ideas. And we were fortunate enough to be chosen for that grant by just a few companies in Europe. But during the, when we started with this game, it was something completely different. Like it was, you wouldn't believe me when you hear me, but it was a 4-player sort of co-op with rewind mechanics, sort of like a braid multiplayer game. And that was quite an undertaking for a small indie studio like us. So, and since we were busy, we made Alva's Awakening on NES almost 2 years ago. We started developing that, and that kind of went on at the same time we did this game in parallel. So that's kind of almost more than 2 years we've been working with this game, and during those 2 years, the game has changed into something really completely different. And at the end, at the end, I'm super excited of how well it turned out, but the development has been quite challenging. And it's definitely something different compared to Alva's when it comes to the normal gameplay. But once again, I definitely think people is going to enjoy the game because it's turning out really well.
Okay. And I suppose since it's such a central facet to the game, in the very least its absence, what sort of combat can you engage in here?
So I won't spoil too much about the story, but the people you're kind of fighting are people that are kind of stuck in limbo, sort of in lost souls. So there aren't enemies in that sense. They're just humans. And right now in the demo that's playing on the screen, there's only basically one sort of enemy. But as of today, we have a couple of more enemies. But you can use your what's it called? It's called a flare gun, and you kind of need to more evade the threats instead of actually trying to engage with them. So it's more of a strategic part of it. It's more like a stealth, as you mentioned before, than it actually is to just shoot them. You can shoot them, but sometimes it's better to just run the other way or try to find an optional path through the game. So it's more about making your way through the world without trying to kill anything instead of the actual fighting. So in that sense, it's almost like you can't call it a point and click game, but it's like it's a story about a couple trying to make their way to this world, and the enemies are mostly there to stop them. So it's not about killing. It's not more about going on this adventure of sorts. Hard to explain.
Well, I suppose that does beg the question: are there consequences for engaging in attacking? Other than the obvious, is that tied into, say, the ending, if you will?
We're still kind of deciding on that. So we have an ending, but it's sort of open-ended, and it's sort of really haven't decided all the details yet. So maybe I'm not sure yet. We still have many more months of production.
Fair enough, I suppose. And I suppose on the note of everything being in flux and adding things, are you at all concerned about feature creep?
No, that's something we've been quite good at with both our games. Like, this will be our third our own game, and if you count the NES port, this will be the fourth game we're making, and we published 2 games as well. So no, we're kind of approaching in this way that the game is playable from finish to start. Like, if we were to release this game tomorrow, it would still work. Like, you can play the game on any platform. It works on Switch. It works on different platforms. It works on Mac and Linux, and you can definitely, everything is in there. We could basically release it tomorrow. So what we're doing is that we're spending 2 weeks just adding more stuff, and then we're spending 2 weeks just polishing that stuff up. So with that, we're not adding huge. This is not a huge 3D game with a huge team. This is a small indie game. So it's easy to just add stuff one day, polish it up for a day or two, and then it's in there. But so feature creep isn't much of a fear for me. The only thing is that we're burning through cash. That's basically what I'm more worried about, because for each month more we spend a lot more cash, because we're not indie in that sense. We still, we have an office, we have, rents, pension funds. There's a lot of cost attached to making games, and that's kind of what's worrying me more than feature creep. But no, we feel good about releasing the game and finishing it.
I'm presuming that the cash flow is enough to sustain the cost of the delay here.
Yeah, it is. We've been fortunate enough to have all those games and the published games and the games we made ourselves. So the cash flow is coming in quite steadily, but it's taken a few years to get to this point. But there's a lot of costs as we worked on this game more than 2 years. There's a lot of costs that's been attached to it, not just the salaries, but with marketing and, script, soundtrack, sound effects. But we're really at the end of production here now, so hopefully we'll be able to wrap everything up and release it sometime next year. Don't know when though, but hopefully early next year.
I'm sure you'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
In earnest. Anyway, so you mentioned that you don't want to spoil the story of Void Hope here too much, but what can you tell us at this stage about what's going on here and who you are and what you're doing?
Very little, I say. You are a couple and you are in this world and you're trying to, like, the people, as you can see in the demo, the people in the city has been infected by this virus of sorts, and you need to make your way through the city as this couple, trying to find out what went wrong and how it went wrong, and maybe possibly see if there's a cure for it. But that's basically everything we've shared so far. I haven't done much podcast because we announced the game like 2 months ago. So I think this is the first podcast I'm doing. So I need to, weigh my words carefully. But I think that's basically what we've shared so far. And we're still adding stuff to the story. But yeah, a couple out on an adventure trying to find what's causing this mysterious virus to infect everyone.
Yes. When in doubt, don't say anything about a thing.
Yeah.
But I suppose I'll, take a stab in the dark at this. In terms of themes, is this a love story?
I have to pass on that question. I think it's. I have to pass on that. I don't want to spoil. The game is, once the game is out, you can play it and you tell me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question though.
Indeed. I suppose shifting back to more of the developmental aspects of Void Hope here, has your development processes changed or gotten more sophisticated since the days of Alwa's legacy?
Yeah, we've using a game engine called Unity. A lot of indie developers use it, and we're also using this map editor, which we use to build all levels called Tiled. And we've been working with those two tools since the start of the first game, which was almost 2 years ago. So during that time, we've managed to improve on the tools, improve on the skills, and improve on the hardware we're using itself. So yeah, I say now we have a quite good grip on how to make a 2D platformer game with pixel art. So when it comes to like bugs, we basically don't really have bugs. Don't quote me on this once the game is out, but like we know so much about playing movement in 2D Unity games, so there's very easy for us to spot bugs and fix them right away. If you compare this to when we were making Alwa's Legacy and even further back in Alwa's Awakening, there was so much stuff we had to learn. So yeah, we definitely I would say perfected the skill, but we definitely have learned a lot using the tools we have. And yeah, and it's back in the day, we only released on one platform, Steam. And when we did Elvis Legacy, we also were able to do Steam. But now we're aiming for GOG, itch.io, Switch, and Steam. But it's still the same team. So, but we've been able to, improve on our game releasing skills. So we hopefully should be able to do a sim ship launch on all platforms. Hopefully, once again, don't quote me, but that's kind of what we're aiming for at the moment. But yeah.
And in terms of platform support, are you like doing all those versions in-house?
Yeah. So our main programmer, a very talented guy called Isaac. So he's on Windows, so we play on Windows, but I'm using a Mac. So since we're doing that, and we always done that, we always have a Mac port. We don't really have to port to Mac or anything like that. And Steam, it just works. We always put the game up very early on Steam. And Switch is something it's a bit more optimization for Switch. It's not that much of an issue for smaller 2D platforms game, but you'd be surprised how much optimization you require to release on Switch, even for these small games. But the game already runs on Switch, and we have it up on Steam Deck as well. So we're not really porting. We don't really spend time on porting. We just make sure we can build on Steam Deck, Mac, Windows, and Switch at all times. So if you were to come into the office tomorrow and ask me for a Switch build, I'd be able to show you one. So yeah, and we're doing that ourselves. When it comes to different platforms like PlayStation and Xbox, and that's more of a question. We have friends, game dev friends that are a porting studio. So we've worked with them before, but we're also considering doing our own ports. There are pros and cons to the question, but right now we're just focusing on Switch and Steam.
Which is a fairly typical thing that the indie scene does. But and I'm assuming that neither Xbox nor PlayStation have reached out to get, at the very least, avoid hope onto their platform.
No, never in my life have I been reached out by any platformer holders, even when I worked
yet.
Yeah, because I worked with Image and Form, and they did the SteamWorld games, and even back then, trying to get a conversation with the platform holders, that's always challenging. So no, the response we've gotten is when we've talked to Nintendo. They're actually we know people there, so they're kind to us, and I was actually fortunate enough to show the game in a close meeting to Nintendo, and that was interesting. So hopefully we'll be able to get some support from them, but only God knows. I don't know.
I guess time will tell on that front.
Yeah.
As far as Microsoft and Sony, it seems to depend on when they're in the mood to find indie fodder for their subscription services. What I understand, or that indie game is fulfilling a specific niche they need to fill that particular month.
My experience with Sony and Microsoft during my years is that if you actually met someone, like if you went to a convention, if you had your Gamescom or your EGX or your PAX, if you met someone there and actually spoke to them, it could be like a 5 or 10 minutes. The chances of you actually getting in contact with any of these people over at the platforms holders, it's just so much bigger if you actually know someone. The reason I know someone at Nintendo is that I've met them many times during conventions, and that's why they respond to my emails. And with the pandemic and now conventions kind of disappearing, and now with the costs, we're based in Sweden, in the Nordic countries of Europe. Flying to a US convention for us, it's an insane amount of money. So we don't know anyone at Microsoft and PlayStation, and that's very much is a disadvantage to us. So But that's just how it is. We're still fortunate enough to be in Europe. There's a lot of devs out there in parts of the world that have a lot worse than us. So I'm not complaining in that sense. But I really dislike the fact that conventions are I wouldn't say gone, but inaccessible for a lot of people due to different reasons, and that's definitely something I miss a lot.
Understandable, but given the past few years, it's not surprising that the convention experience has been diminished. Let's say.
Yeah.
At any rate, switching gears here to an aspect we haven't really talked about yet, is the music. What are you going for in terms of the soundtrack?
So I would say the soundtrack is probably what I like most about the game, besides the visual style. But we were fortunate enough to sign with this synthwave artist called Waveshaper. So he's done he did a game called, what was it called? I could be wrong. It's called Fury, I think. Came out many years ago. Could be wrong. If he's listening, I'm sorry. But I've been a fan of Waveshaper for many, many years. And there was one of those artists that was like, he's too good and he's too cool to actually try to ask. But then for some reason, I decided maybe I should just email him and ask. And it turns out that not only was he Swedish, he was like 2 hours away from where I live. So that was fun. So I just emailed, because I've been listening to him for like 5 or 6 years. I know he had music on like shows on Netflix and stuff like that. And I know he's working with a lot of cool devs. So I emailed him, and he was definitely a fan of what we're doing. And we came to an agreement, and ever since then, he's been making the music, and the soundtrack is finished. So let me think. There are around 14 tracks, I'd say. What's fun is that he once scored a movie, Waveshaper, like he did the complete soundtrack for a movie. I think it was part with other artists as well. And what we're going for here with Avoid Hope is, like, I draw all my inspiration from movies. Like, very seldom do I draw inspiration from video games now. So in that sense, Avoid Hope is much inspired by movies. So we're going for kind of like a movie score. If you compare it to Alva's Legacy, Alva's Awakening, both have soundtracks that I really like, but they're mostly based on like a 30-second loop or a 1-minute loop, an intro, and then you have a chip loop of music. And that's great. I love chip music. But with Avoid Hope, we have almost these orchestral sounding states almost, when it's like one track can be like 4 minutes, and it's so much going on. So you could, when you're playing the game, like every time we had a new track, you could just stay for like minutes and just absorbing all the music, and it adds so much to the atmosphere. And I'm super proud over how well it turned out, and I can't, hopefully that's going to be a great soundtrack on itself, once it hits digital release and stuff like that. But very much happy how well it turned out. The artist is Waveshaper, and so far released one track. It's on Spotify. It's called Determination. It's the it's the first single, the one single we used in the trailer for the game. Very cool.
And will you release the soundtrack separately?
We when it comes to stuff like vinyl, that's still something we're just talking about, and that's going to be on Waveshaper's end. So he's probably doing something on its own. But it's definitely going to be available on various streaming platforms where people get streaming music, and hopefully on vinyl and CD and stuff like that as well. So yeah.
And presumably Steam itself, since somehow.
We have everything. The only thing that's stopping us, I was actually thinking about this earlier this week about putting the Steam soundtrack up there, but we haven't finalized all the track names. So, and we haven't finished all the assets. So it would make sense to finish the track names and the assets before we put something up there. But it's definitely coming on Steam.
Indeed. And let me see. Have you worked out pricing for Avoid yet?
I haven't. I think pricing is a beast in itself now, because I don't know how much you know about, but Steam, recently, about a year ago, changed their pricing recommendations. So basically, they recommended everyone to just increase their prices, by $1 or $2, depending on regions. And we haven't adjusted that for our previous games before. That's because, so much, aspects to think about when you increase the price. But they're to clarify, they're doing this because of, inflation and, rising costs and stuff like that. So I had a price point in mind for Avoid Hope. It's going to be like semi-mid, not your cheapest in the game, but not your priciest in the game. But now with the prices increases, inflation, stuff like that, kind of hard to say. I would almost, go out and ask you what you would say. Like, would it be like 10 or 20 or?
Yeah, that's about where I would place this from what I've seen. About 20 USD, maybe 25.
Yeah.
But we have seen a great number of games that that not necessarily play like this, but look like this in the $15-$20 range.
Yeah. That's something I'm considering too. But we haven't decided yet. But we'll see once we. It's kind of because this game isn't a 20-hour game, and I know there's a lot of people that value time. If you have a certain amount of time, and I know that a lot of people that disagree with that. But this is quite a short but intense game, and that's even harder to price, I'd say.
The dollars per minute gaming argument is something that has permeated the medium really since the beginning. So, and
it's a fallacy, but it's a popular one.
Well, I mean, just the other month, I think I saw an article from PC Gamer complaining about the amount of time that Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart took, for being a $60 game. Like, oh no, it's only a 9 to 10 hour experience, which is an average experience for a single player action platforming game. At least it used to be. It's like, and not every game is aiming to be an infinite games as a service money hole.
We'll see where we end up with that. But at the end of the day, because every single game we've released, not only at Elden Fixes, but at the previous studios, this has been discussion what to charge for it, and 100% of the time I never had anyone complain about it. So I'm pretty sure we'll find something that people will be thrilled about.
Hopefully that does indeed become the case. And let me see here. So moving a bit beyond Avoid Hope here, have you found any new games that you wish to publish?
More than I can find the time for. Yes, we are talking to one developer right now, and they are working on lo and behold, a pixel platformer, and that's something right up our alley. So we are talking to them, and I think that looks like a pretty cool game. But we're just talking so far. And then we had, due to NDA and whatnot, we had a very successful developer reach out to us, and he asked us about doing an Xbox One port and PS4 port of his game. And that's a super successful indie game. And I was like, I would jump the gun to work on that game, but we just can't due to time and resources, because it's just me and my colleagues. So I'm kind of trying to postpone that into next year, because then after Avoid Hope, we don't really have anything planned right now. So, and I would assume that discussion is still up in the air, although we haven't really talked for, it's been summer and whatnot. So those two games we are discussing. And then we have our previous game, Cathedral and Crane Origins, which is a game we published on Switch and PS4. And those, not saying that not saying this officially, but that's something we're exploring if we can bring those games to other platforms as well. But yeah, we are a publisher, and we are getting pitches like several every week, and every now and then we find something that we really want to work with. But I just wish there were more of us so we could do more cool stuff.
Indeed.
More hours in the day.
Yeah.
Access to a time machine.
Yeah.
Anyway, I suppose my final question at this stage is: have you given any thought to not necessarily expanding, but changing development of games? Like, because this is your third, maybe not necessarily a pixel platformer, but it's in that mold, if you will. Are you looking to stay in that lane, or do something different?
Yeah.
For the next project.
I think there's two aspects to that. It's a common thing for indie developers to make one or two games that have the same characteristics or same type of game, and then all of a sudden they're throwing everything out, everything they knew out the window and just jumping on something else. And I say for a lot of, I could give you 100 reasons why that's a pretty bad idea normally, because imagine if you were a restaurant that you made the best burgers there ever were, and then all of a sudden you threw that out and you became a pasta restaurant. That wouldn't make sense to anyone, and indie developers keep doing that all the time. So I say from a financial and a production standpoint, that's a bad decision, but from a creative standpoint, that's a great decision, because there's only so many platform games you can make. So there's definitely allowing me to do something that's not a platformer. But I always have to weigh that against why should we spend 3 years making a 3D adventure game starring a weird chicken or stuff like that? Because although that would be fun, but it would just take so many more years to make, and it would could be really cool, but could also be devastating. But with that said, I didn't really work this summer because I have family and a son, so I didn't really work on anything. But what I did is that I made sure that each day during my vacation, which was around 30 days, I came up with at least one game idea. So I took a pen and pad and I just sat for on my balcony for 30 minutes, just okay, what can I come up with? And we have 30 game ideas, and we are going to evaluate those. And I did my best to try to come up with something that's not a 2D platformer. Although I would say, probably half of them are. But I did my best trying to come up with 3D games, or, a resource management game, or, point and click games. And we're going to take all those 30 ideas, probably just, delete 10 of them already. And then the remaining 20 or 15, I'm going to present to the team. And then we evaluate them and see if it's something we all want to make. And at the end of the day, we'll probably have 2 or 3 ideas, and hopefully, 1 or 2 of them is going to be something that's not a 2D platform. And hopefully, in a year or two, we'll be able to make them and release them. So yeah, we're definitely trying to explore something else. I would love to make some sort of, a resource management game, because although I don't have time to play those, I really, love the love the idea of them. That would just be so much fun. And with the pixel art our artist has, it would be super cozy to look at and play, hopefully. But we'll see. Time will tell.
Well, I suppose we'll see on that when we get there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll see if my colleagues here have any further questions for you.
I think I'm good.
I'm good, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mikeal. It was good having you on the program to talk Avoid Hope here with us today.
Yeah.
Lightning conversation, and I know I'm looking forward to see how this game gets defined in the months ahead. So, in the meantime, the game has a Steam page where you can play the demo that we showcased here. So you can go and download that now. And also, you can go and wishlist this, which always helps the developers.
Yeah.
So, look for it coming next year.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
No problem. No problem. Anyway, so that'll about do it for this installment. Be sure to tune in next time for our Sunday reviews. And until then, I shall wish you good gaming.
Have a great day.